Hey Brooksiders, thanks for being with us here this morning at Brookside. Welcome to each and every one of you. If this is your first time out to a Brookside service, we'd love to know that you are here. If that's you, you're newer to Brookside services, hop on over to connect.mybrookside.church and fill in our quick online connection card to let us know that you are here. And when you do that, we will make a donation to COVID-19 relief work going on in our city. Thanks very much for doing that. We've got some details coming up at the end of the service about some things that you might want to know about. But before that, we have some teaching as part of our Something More series. And we're going to get things started right now with some worship.
Well, good morning and welcome to Brookside Baptist Church. My name's Lucas and I'm the worship director here, and this is my wife, Taryn, and we're so excited to lead you in some songs of worship to God today. But before we do, I wanted to talk a little bit about this one thing. In the book of Nehemiah, which is kind of the book that's driving this series that we're currently in, there's a really, really cool thing happening in this interaction, and we're going to look at it a little bit more later today. But at some point, the king who Nehemiah works for simply asks Nehemiah, "What is it that you want? What's your request?" And Nehemiah, the first thing he does is he prays to God. And I think that Nehemiah is recognizing that God reigns above everything. That God, even though this king could do some stuff and there's things that he can do and can't do, Nehemiah recognizes that God reigns above even that. And I want to just remind you today that God reigns above all the good things and the bad things, everything that you're going through. He sees it all, and he's above and beyond it all. And so we're going to sing a song that really speaks to that attribute of God this morning.
Over the universe and over every heart. Hi, everybody. So glad you're tuning in with us today. My name's Greg. I'm the lead pastor here at Brookside. We are in a new teaching series based on the book of Nehemiah, an Old Testament. He wasn't a prophet. He was actually more of a public servant. He worked for the king in Babylon 2,500 years ago. And we're looking at his story, and we're using that to look at how God is calling us to something more. God has something more in store for you and for me, far more actually than we ever even imagine. Last week, as we kind of got into this series, we looked at the fact that God has big dreams for us. God has big plans for you and for your family and for me and for us and this community. He's got things that he wants to do, and he wants us to be involved in them. And last week we looked at the fact that we could so easily miss it. Like, we've got to be opening our eyes and our ears and our hearts, and we have to have the kind of attitude that says, God, I want whatever it is that you are wanting for me and for this place. Bring it on. I want to be in on it. That's kind of what we looked at last week. We gotta find our something. That's kind of what we talked about. You've got to find what's the something that God is calling you to be. You're not being asked to do everything, but there's something. That's where we began last week, and today as we carry on, we're going to jump into the second chapter of the book of Nehemiah. As we get into it, we are going to ask the question, what do you do when God gives you a big dream? Like, what if you realize God is birthing some dream in your heart, and it's big, like super big. It's so big, there's no way you could ever do it yourself. It's just so far beyond you. What do? Do you just forget about it? Do you leave it on the doorstep? Do you just think, oh, well, maybe somebody else somewhere will do something about that? So we're kind of talking today about big dreams. We're not talking about kind of the smaller dreams, and not that smaller dreams are less important. They're just as important. They're just a different scale. So if your dreams, if God's calling you to, help a neighbor, if he's calling you to volunteer at the mission, if he's calling you to serve on the children's team, those are great things, and you need to lean into those things. But that's not really kind of what we're looking at today. We're looking at those bigger things that are beyond us, things that we can't do on ourselves. Those things that are on the scale of the impossible, the scale that kind of could easily make us say, I'm not even going to think about it, not even going to go there, that's pointless, right? What do we do with those things? Because the reality is God does at times bring these impossible dreams into our lives, into our world. He kind of brings them onto our lap, and we have this question, like, what do we do with them? How do we handle them? What are we supposed to do? I remember reading the story of a man by the name of Hudson Taylor. You may recognize that name if you've been around church environments for a while. Hudson Taylor, he lived back in 1850s. That was kind of when he was getting started in his ministry. He was 21 years old when he felt God was calling him to reach a nation, to reach the country of China. And here he was, 21 years old, getting on a boat, leaving from Liverpool in England, and off he goes on a 4-month journey to get to Shanghai and begin this ministry that God was calling him to. He gave up everything he had, and he had nothing with him. He took nothing. He asked for no money. He just trusted God and went. And he spent the next 51 years of his life reaching into the interior of the nation of China, trying to share the gospel with people, sharing it with them, bringing people to Jesus Christ. And occasionally when he did go back to Great Britain, he would be urging people, begging people, pleading with them to have a heart for this nation, have a compassion for them, to possibly sense God's call to come as a missionary to serve there. And over the years, he brought actually hundreds of missionaries to come and serve with him, to the point where he actually began a mission organization. CIM, China Inland Mission, was the mission organization that he founded. And it was all just based on this desire to see God at work to accomplish the impossible, to reach hundreds and hundreds, thousands, millions of people who needed to know the gospel of Jesus Christ and knew nothing about it. Huge, impossible dream. And Hudson knew something about tough stuff, tough dreams. And this is what he said when it comes to these impossible dreams that God can bring into our lives. He says this: there's 3 stages to every great work of God. 3 stages. Stage 1, first, it's impossible. It's impossible. It can't be done. And that's what everybody will tell you. Stage 1, first step, it's impossible. Then it's difficult. And then it's done. It goes from impossible to difficult to done, and that's usually because the difficult lasts a good long time of the process. But like there's this expectation that we can sometimes have that following Jesus is supposed to be so easy, and it's not going to be a challenge, and it's just going to be like a walk in the park, and everything's going to go well. And the truth is, following Jesus is the best kind of life we can have. He said, "I've come to give you this full and rich and meaningful life. It's full of purpose and passion and everything else, but it's not easy. There's challenges to it." When God asks us to pursue an impossible dream, that's mind-blowing. Think of what it must have been like for the first apostles, the first disciples of Jesus Christ. There they were. They'd been with Jesus for 3 years. Now they've kind of witnessed the animosity and the brutality of a crowd that called for and demanded and executed a sentence on Jesus, caused his death. He's been killed. They're fearful of their own lives. They're thinking everything's done. Everything's like just head for the hills. It's all over. Everything's done with. And then this wonderful, amazing moment where they saw Jesus and recognized he's alive from the dead. He's come back, and it's like, yay, we're saved. This is awesome. But then he turns to them and says, "You go and make disciples of all nations." And here they were. There's like a dozen of them. They're hiding away from the authorities around them. Like these guys were scared. They didn't know what to do. And Jesus was like, "Okay, you are going to reach everybody on the planet. Go to it." Like, talk about a big dream. Talk about an impossible dream. Like, all nations. Like, all? Are you serious? Like that's impossible. How do you do that? How do you take on a dream that is impossible? For a lot of people, they don't. They just shut off their mind. It's like, oh, that's not me. I can't do that. I can't make a difference. So somebody else better figure it out. And they don't. But if you are the type that is like, no, Jesus is calling me. I'm gonna follow where he leads. I want to lean in. I'm going to be a part of what God is doing, regardless of what's going on around me, regardless of how challenging it is with all the restrictions and protocols we're having to face right now. I want to lean into what God is doing. I want to be a part of it. How do we do that? How do we turn the impossible into the possible? How do we see God? How are we part of that? Because it's really God that makes it happen. It's not us. He does it. How can we be part of that process of seeing the impossible turned into the possible and ultimately turned into the done? How does that happen? There's 3 steps that we see in the 2nd chapter of the book of Nehemiah that I think can be very helpful for us. It can give us some guidelines as we're trying to do this. So we're going to jump in. We're going to jump in at the beginning of chapter 2 of Nehemiah. And here, if you missed out on last week, this guy was the cupbearer to the king of Babylon. He was in an incredibly powerful place, very close to the seat of almost full authority in that country, in that whole nation. But he was in a risky situation because the king could say whatever he wanted to say, he could do whatever he wanted to do, and if anybody either ticked him off or bothered him in a way he didn't like, they usually didn't have a chance to fix it because they were dead. Like that's just what happened. And Nehemiah, in the previous chapter, felt God calling him to do something about the plight of the people of his nation, the Jews that were back in Jerusalem. The city was a shambles. It was knocked down. It was falling apart. And he was sensing God saying, I want to do something here. I'm gonna use you to help rebuild the walls. So I want you to go. That's kind of what he was sensing. But he's like, how am I going to do this? And how is it going to go? And he was praying and he was crying out to God for direction. And finally, it's like, okay, I sense God calling me. Here's what I'm going to do. One, what do? We trust God. We trust God as we move along. That's what Nehemiah did. Down in verse 3 of chapter 2, it says this. He says, then I was terrified. He'd actually asked the king, like he went before the king and he was doing his duty, and he let it show on his face and the way he was acting that he was upset. And again, that's a no-no. You don't do that. You put a smile on your face when you go in front of the king. You act happy. You say nice things. And if you've got problems, deal with them outside. And he didn't do that. He went in and he let it be shown that he was sad. And the king was like, hey, what's going on? And that's where we'll jump in. He says, then I was terrified. And this is his own words. I was terrified, but I replied, long live the king. How can I not be sad? For the city where my ancestors are buried is in ruins, and the gates have been destroyed by fire. The king asked, well, how can I help you? With a prayer to the God of heaven, I replied, if it please the king, and if you are pleased with me, your servant, send me to Judah to rebuild the walls, to rebuild the city where my ancestors are buried. Nehemiah it may not seem like much here, but he was putting his life on the line. He was taking a huge risk, but he was trusting God to do it. He felt that God had called him for this purpose and this task, and he was stepping out. He was trusting God to do what only God could do, and that's to work in the heart and the mind of the king to cause him to be favorably disposed to let Nehemiah do all these things. So he trusted that God would come through, and he acted. He opened his mouth. He stuck his neck out. He put his neck on the line, and he went for it. And the king agreed. God showed himself trustworthy. He came through for him. And one of the things that stands out to me from this is just how God knows how to resource his dreams. If God is truly in something, if God is truly calling you to do something, if God is truly calling us as a church family to do something, he will supply what we need. He can use us, but if we're not willing, he'll use somebody else. He'll do it. He'll find a way. Back in the book of Esther, we find a similar situation where Esther, who was the queen, had the opportunity to either try and intervene when one of the other magistrates of their nation was plotting to try and get rid of the Jews, or she could step in and do something. And her uncle very wisely said this. He said to Esther, when she was considering whether or not, or what she should do or not, he said, well, if you keep silent at a time like this is Esther 4:14, if you keep silent at a time like this, deliverance and relief will rise from another place. What Mordecai, the guy that was saying that, what he was getting at was, God doesn't need you. God's going to do what he wants done, but you're going to miss out. Like, you have the opportunity to either come along for the ride, to be a part of it, to be the instrument through which God works, or you can be taken out of the game. And God will bring somebody else. God will make sure that what he wants done gets done. God's dreams will move forward. The question is, will you be a part of it? Will I be a part of it? Will we be the ones that he uses to do it? That's the question that really comes down to it in this. And to me, that is such a comforting thought. Because sometimes it's hard to tell, like this dream. Like, some dreams are very simple. The dream of seeing the nations won to Jesus Christ, the dream of seeing all people, all nations being made disciples of Jesus Christ. We don't have to ask, is that a dream that God wants? Is that a God dream? Well, yeah, it is. There it is, black and white, or red and white, depending on which Bible translation you're using. It's right there clear for us. Some dreams are not that clear. And sometimes God uses either his prerogative to kind of close doors or open doors. And when he does that, we can get a good sense of, oh, I guess that was not his will. Good thing that he closed that door, that I won't put any more energy into that. I'm going to shift to something else. We can do that. We can trust him. God's trustworthy as we do this. A question that comes to my mind when I think about this is, what does it look like for us, whether as individuals or even us as a church family? We're being invited by God to trust him for big things. We're being invited by God to do things and to be involved in things that are way beyond our capacity. What would it look like for us? What would it look like for a church that truly believed that God was able? What would a church like that look like? How would a church like that act? What would a church like that do if they truly believed that God would empower them to reach the nations around them, to reach the people around them with the gospel of Jesus Christ? What would a church like that do? Like what would the partners in a church like that do? What would they spend their time on during the day, or their leisure time, or their extra time? How would they budget their money? What would they be investing in? See, if we really trust God with our lives, with our careers, with our families, what would we do? That's an important question to think through for yourself. For Julie and I, one of the things it meant was quitting our jobs, selling our home, saying goodbye to family and friends that were close to us back in Sarnia, almost 5 years ago now, 4.5 years ago, and moving to Canada, because we believed God was calling us to a church family, into a community, and to be used by God along with all of us to see his will fulfilled, to see his dream of seeing Canada and the whole region around us one with the gospel of Christ, transforming every part of our culture, every part of our community, every aspect of it. That's what it meant for us. Right? How do you take an impossible dream and make it possible? How do you take it on? Simply trust God. That's the beginning. You got to trust God. Secondly, you got to formulate a plan. You got to come up with a plan, and that's what we find Nehemiah doing here in this chapter. We move a little bit further down after he'd spent some time talking with the king and asking for stuff and all that kind of thing. He received it. He got all the things that he had asked for, which is awesome. And then it says down in verse 11 of Nehemiah 2, it says this: "So I arrived in Jerusalem 3 days, and 3 days later, it actually took him probably months to get there, but 3 days after he arrived, 3 days later, I slipped out during the night, taking only a few others with me. I had not told anyone about the plans God had put in my heart for Jerusalem. We took no pack animals with us, except the donkey that I was riding, and after dark, I went out to inspect the broken walls and burned gates." What was Nehemiah doing? He was inspecting the property. He was getting a sense of the lay of the land. God was calling him to lead a people to rebuild the walls. He needed to know what shape it was in. He wanted to find out, how broken down are they? Like how extensive is the damage? So he went and he surveyed. He actually went right around the whole city of Jerusalem, checking out the lay of the land. So he wanted to go and he got a good sense for what he had, because he was building a plan. He was formulating a plan. He wanted to kind of verify what was required and how they needed to work and have all of that ready, because a plan needs a destination. Yeah, the rebuilt walls, that's great. That was the destination of this dream. But it needed an origin as well. It needed a current location. It's like, here's what shape the place actually is in. And Nehemiah got that so that he could kind of factor that into the plans that he was making, because we want our plans to be the best possible plans we could make. So we checked out the condition of the walls. He looked around at all the people that were there. He kind of got a sense of who was there. And he also kind of knew, as he is going, the resources that he had. And he knew that God was leading him through all of this. So those were the resources that Nehemiah had in creating his plan that he believed God was calling him to do. For us, it may look different. For us, it may be getting outside help or expertise when we're looking at developing a new ministry, or when we're looking at expanding our facility, or when we're looking at developing our online presence. Whatever it is that we're doing, we're exploring and investigating and checking out different things. For you, as a family, if God's calling you to get involved in a ministry somewhere or to serve here and do something, you'll be probably looking at your calendar, and you'll be looking at all kinds of different things to see how can this best work. How do you take on an impossible dream? You trust God, you formulate a plan, and thirdly, you build a team. Again, we're talking about like impossible dreams. We're talking about things that are huge, that cause you to turn away and say, I can't do this. Those are the kind of dreams that we're talking about here. We build a team because we recognize we can't do it ourselves. Nehemiah went there. He was called by God. He had all these confirmations that God was calling him to lead the charge in building the wall, but he couldn't do it himself. He couldn't just go, I'm going to start cutting all these stones and I'm going to start laying all these things and I'm going to do it myself. Impossible. He couldn't. He had to build a team. And that's what he started to do. Down in verse 16, it says this: "The city officials didn't know that I'd been out there or what I was doing, for I had not yet said anything to anyone about my plans. I had not yet spoken to the Jewish leaders, the priests, the nobles, the officials, or anyone else in the administration. But now I said to them, you know very well what trouble we're in. Jerusalem lies in ruins, and its gates have been destroyed by fire. Let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem and end this disgrace." I'm sure the conversation probably went a little longer than that, but that's the gist of it. That's what Nehemiah recorded of the conversation. But what was Nehemiah doing here? How did Nehemiah start building a team? He did a couple of things that I think are really important. The first thing he did was he got them to kind of open their eyes again and take a look at what's around them. Make the present unbearable. That's what he was trying to do. He was saying, look, guys, you're living and existing in this place where all these where the walls are just ripped down. It's a mess. It's not only it's a mess, but you're at risk. Your family's at risk. Your safety is gone because what is meant to defend you is not there, and you're a joke. Like everybody that walks by Jerusalem thinks it's a pile of junk, and you're living in the middle of that. And it's like, oh, who are these weirdos living in a pile of junk? Oh, they're the followers of God. Oh, wow, what kind of God is that lets them live in a place like that? Like that, there's this whole sense of disgrace. That there's a sense that God was his reputation was on the line here because of what was going on. And he was like, don't let that be okay. Don't put up with that anymore. For Nehemiah, he couldn't stand it. He couldn't bear it. Neither should they. They shouldn't be able to either. Like that there should be the sense that this is what is not acceptable. We've got to change. We've got to do something about it. We're going to stop just kind of hiding our eyes and pretending it's not the case. We're going to do something about it. So you make the present unbearable, and then you share the dream of what could be, the dream of a better future worth fighting for. And that's what Nehemiah was doing here. It's like, man, just picture what it'd be like if these walls were back up and they were built and they were strong and they were firm and your families were safe and people, we couldn't be attacked from outsiders, and people wouldn't, when they're looking at us and looking at our city and, kind of represents God and everything, like they'd be looking going, whoa, that's pretty cool. There's something must be going on there. instead of losers. Like, it's a totally different thing. Share a dream of something better, something worth fighting for. That's what Nehemiah did. And for him, it was pretty simple. It's like, look, there's the stones, there's the junk, like it's a mess. Not hard for him to point out that the city was a disaster. It was exposed, it was unsafe, it was a disgrace, laughingstock, all that kind of stuff. Even though the people had settled, even though they were they'd kind of given up on the impossible, it was easy to point it out. For you, for me, for us, the impossible dream, the biggest dream, which was to bring glory to God by reaching all people, making disciples, fully engaged disciples of all the nations, like all nations. Like we start breaking a sweat when we start thinking more than 2 houses past our own. Like he's saying everybody, everywhere. That's the goal. That's the dream. That can be a little bit harder to describe, and it's so much easier for a lot of us to just kind of say, oh, that's not really my thing, I'm not going to worry about it, and everything else. So we got to help each other. We need to help capture that sense that we can't let that carry on. But the lives of people matter. We can't do that. How do you build a team? You make the present unbearable, share the dream, and then you show the way. You show the way. Help them see how it is possible. Got to reveal the plan, the resources, the steps, everything else. And Nehemiah did that. We see that in down in verse 18, and then we'll get into that other story. It says this, down in verse 18, it says, "Then I told them about how the gracious hand of God had been on me and about my conversation with the king. And they, when they heard all that and they recognized everything that's going on and everything else, they replied at once, 'Yeah, let's rebuild the wall. This is going to be great.' And so they began to do the good work. They actually started at it. And to me, this is one of the great things. When God is in it, other people will join in. Other people will see God's hand at work, and they'll start coming alongside. Maybe not immediately, but they will eventually. Perhaps God will birth an impossible dream in your heart. Something just mind-blowing. Something that you share it with a friend, they'd say, good luck, right? Perhaps God will call you to adopt the dream that he's planted in somebody else's heart. God uses others to inspire us to his thing. It's not who's come up with it, do we all see what God is calling us to do? If it's God's dream, it's going to be bigger than you are. It's going to be bigger than I am. But we want it to outlast all of us as well. We as a church family, we've got a clear mission. We're called to make fully engaged followers of Jesus. We've got very clear values that we want to have describe us, and as we serve, as we do those things, we're called to serve first. We're called to pull together. We're called to aim high. We're called to make it happen. We're called to laugh hard along the way. Those are things that characterize us. But what we as your board and your staff are working on and praying through now is what we believe God is calling us as a church family to be and to do. It's what we believe God's vision is for us. What is it that God is calling us to do beyond, here's the what and the why and everything else. What is it that God is calling us to become? What's the vision that God has for us? Why did God plant us here and use us here? What is he wanting us to accomplish for his kingdom? We're formulating that now. We're formulating that plan. And over the next number of months, we'll start building that team, helping us all see what God is calling us to do and showing the way, sharing the dream. But like I said a couple of minutes back, this can be hard stuff. And the story that I wanted to touch on was about a guy by the name of Wilberforce. And he lived back in the 1700s. Back in the late 1700s, what I would consider one of the darkest times in our history of kind of what was supposed to be a civilized world was the slave trade. And back in the late 1700s, English traders would go and raid the African coast, capturing between 35,000 and 50,000 Africans every year, shipping them across the Atlantic and selling them like cattle as slaves. And it was a big moneymaker, and a lot of people and a lot of the world, the civilized world, were relying on it. And even though a lot of people thought it was terrible and everything else, most people just kind of sighed and said, "Oh well, that's just kind of a necessary evil. We can't get away from it." But this guy named Wilberforce felt that it could not stay. Something had to be done. He was a young politician in Britain who had recently surrendered his life to Jesus Christ, and he came to realize how empty and meaningless his life had been up until this point, and he just felt called by God to take on the cause of abolition of slavery as his kind of one of his key life focuses. And he wrote this. He said this. I thought it was so powerful a statement. It was important for us to hear. He said this: "So enormous, so dreadful, so irremediable did the slave trade's wickedness appear, that my own mind was completely made up for abolition. Let the consequences be what they would, I from this time determined that I would never rest until I had effected its abolition." Can you sense the passion in this guy? Can you sense the sense of clarity, of direction, of vision, of purpose? He said, "I'm not going to rest until slavery is abolished. I'm not going to stop. I'm not going to quit. It doesn't matter what comes up against me. It doesn't matter how difficult it gets. I am going to pursue this." That's what he did. He became the target of all kinds of attacks and threats and attempts on his life, and he kept tabling legislation to abolish it, and bill after bill, year after year. I think his first one was in 1789, and he kept doing them year after year, all the way up till 2008, or 1805, sorry. Like every year he was doing it, and he ended up getting sick, and he was on his deathbed, and it was actually on his deathbed when he heard that Parliament had finally passed the abolition of slavery. And it was because he had persisted for so long, and it's because he had built a team of people that believed in this cause and were working with him to do it. If he hadn't shared that dream, if he hadn't inspired others to join in, it probably wouldn't have happened at all. But God used William Wilberforce to change the landscape of the world for good. He pursued that vision, even when that vision was impossible, even when everybody around said, "You can't do it. Don't even bother trying." He did it. That's what God is calling us to do. And that's what I am inviting you to lean into more and more in your life today. Catch the vision of what God is calling you to do, what God is calling us to do, whether that's kind of directly from God or the vision that he's sharing with us as a church family. Pursue the vision, even those impossible kind of beyond you kind of visions, like pursue those things. Pour your life into the things that will outlast you, so that when you're gone and you're no longer able to do anything, the work that you've put into it will continue on in the lives of others that you've touched, and we'll see the vision of God move forward even more effectively and more powerfully. See what you can do about it even now. This week you can be building stronger spiritual muscles, getting even stronger spiritually so that you can jump into more things, whether it's by prayer or Bible reading, serving where you can, or building stronger ties with people on your team. Your church family is your team. Like, dig into spending time with them, even if it's on a Zoom chat or whatever, whether it's distance with coffee in the backyard or whatever you're doing. Find ways to connect. Join a life group. Next week, we're going to have a great opportunity. You're going to be hearing more next week about how you can get into a life group. We'll share some of those details on how you can join in. But join into what God is doing. Don't miss out on the opportunity to be a part of seeing the impossible become possible and become reality for the glory of God. Let's pray. Father, some of this stuff's scary. Some of this just kind of sounds like fantasy and things that only special people do. Some of this sounds like stuff that we're not cut out for. And God, I pray that you would help us to recognize that the specialness doesn't come from us, it comes from you, and it comes from your power, it comes from your Spirit indwelling us and empowering us and leading us. And God, I pray that we would not only recognize the opportunities that we have day by day, but we would pour our lives into the things that really matter. The dreams that you have for us and our families and for this community around us. We pray that you'd be glorified as we do it. And we look forward to what you are going to do. In Jesus' name, amen.
Under one name, we are a tide that's rising, and we cannot be contained. Gathered under one name, oh, for 1,000 tongues to sing the glories of our Lord God Almighty. Oh, to sing the Savior's praise, the triumph of His grace. You are worthy, God. We have found our anthem at the cross where sin was slain. Gathered under one name, where every chain is broken and every sorrow swept away. Gathered under one name, oh, for 1,000 tongues to sing the glories of our Lord God Almighty. Oh, to sing the Savior's praise, the triumph of His grace. You are worthy. You are worthy, God. Oh.
Hey Brookside, there's some stuff coming up that you might want to know about. Hey everybody, just had to break in for just a quick second here. This is Future Jim coming to you from 10:30 a.m. on September 13th at the church, and as you can see, it's raining. So unfortunately, we're going to have to postpone our plans. The outdoor in-person service is going to happen instead on September 20th, not September 13th. So plan on coming out on September 20th at 10:30 a.m. to the church for an in-person outdoor service. If that's something that you're planning on doing, no pressure if you don't want to do that, but if you want to take part in that, it's now happening September 20th as long as the weather cooperates. Thanks very much, and now back to you, Jim. How's that?
Good.
This coming week, we have some of our normal events happening, like the online gathering on Wednesday night at 7 p.m. Come when you can, hang out for a bit, leave when you need to. And there will also be our usual pre-service gathering next Sunday morning at 8:30. See some friendly faces, catch up a bit in our virtual lobby just before the service. You can get more info about those, including the links that you will need so that you can participate in the Brookside Brief email newsletter. And you'll want to make sure that you are signed up for the email newsletter because there's going to be more info coming through there very soon about other activities that are going to get going for the fall season. So watch that carefully over the coming weeks, and if you don't get it, sign up for the Brookside Brief at mybrookside.church. If you happen to be newer to Brookside, like maybe you're just checking it out recently, or maybe you're trying something new just today, and this is your first time on the stream, don't be afraid to jump in on any of our online events. You are welcome to do that, and we would love to see you there. And hey, if you are new to Brookside, we'd also love to know that you were here this morning. Would you fill out our online connection card at connect.mybrookside.church? Just let us know a little bit about yourself, and when you do that, we'll make a donation to Respond Ottawa and their efforts to help meet needs across our city during the current COVID-19 crisis. So connect with us and help crisis response in our city at the same time. You can do that at connect.mybrookside.church. And remember that our Brookside response team is here to help if you need anything. Like if you need groceries delivered while you're isolating, or you just need a hand with something as we stick to social distancing guidelines. You can put in a request at mybrookside.church on the church website. And that's also where you can sign up to be part of the response team if you want to help serve others. It's just one of the ways that Brookside is staying connected to each other. Now, our mission at Brookside is that we want to help develop fully engaged followers of Christ. That's behind everything that we do. We want to see more people connect with Jesus and to see their lives changed for the better by hearing his message. Thank you for giving generously towards this mission so that we can see more people become more fully engaged followers of Jesus. If you want to support this mission financially, you can do that through check, pre-authorized debit, or e-transfer. Instructions for all of that can be found at mybrookside.church/giving. Let's continue to focus on seeing more of our community impacted by the love of Christ. Thanks for being here with us today. We really hope that we can connect again at one of our online events coming up this week. We hope to see you soon. Take care.